Welcome to Guys Dealings with Feelings, the podcast dedicated to addressing men's mental health issues and providing practical solutions. My journey has been profoundly shaped by the loss of my son, and through this experience, I've gained valuable insights. I'm here to share what I've learned and continue to discover along the way. If you find this podcast helpful, please like, share, subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening. Following us in your 5-star rating can make a significant difference in spreading our message and potentially changing someone's life. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under Guys Dealing with Feelings, and on YouTube and Instagram at ITU Thrive. That's the letter I, the number 2, the letter U, and the word thrive. So today I'm super happy to have Owen Marcus on. I'm excited to get to know more about him and his work. He's a pioneering coach and author known for integrating emotional physiology and attachment theory into men's emotional connection. He helps men transform their relationships and leadership skills into achieving personal and professional success through emotional wellness. As a co-founder of his program, MELD, Owen continues to innovate in emotional leadership and connection. MELD's unique approach combines somatic mindfulness and polyvagal theory to equip men with the tools they need to thrive in their personal and professional lives. Thank you so much for being here today, Owen.
Well, my honor, Aaron.
I'm excited to get to know more about you. If you don't mind, could you give us all kind of the Cliff Note version of your life journey and how you landed in the field working with men?
Yeah. The end product is I never expected to be here. I never would have. Someone asked me, certainly when I got on my journey close to 50 years ago, if I'd been doing this, even 30 years ago, when I got into men's work, I'd say no way. Short story is, my undergraduate degree was in psychology. I realized I didn't want to be a therapist. Ended up in Boulder, Colorado, back in the 70s or mid 70s. And one thing led to another. I had a roommate that had given up his law practice to learn to be a rolfer. And he convinced me to try rolfing, which is a kind of deep tissue, not massage, but chronic release of tension, where a rolfer realigns the body to be in better alignment with gravity. It was developed by Dr. Rolf. I ended up, only experiencing the process, which in the course of 10 sessions and then 9 months later, I had grown an inch and lost 20 pounds of tension. And that tension was really a lot of emotional tension or trauma. And in the course of that, really got turned on to this whole field of somatics, spent 4 years in Boulder, essentially like in a postgraduate program, learning all this, moved down to Scottsdale, Arizona, or Phoenix, ended up starting a rolfing practice that became an integrated medical clinic, worked with a lot of professional athletes, Olympic athletes, did studies on this work. Was down there for about 20 years, literally got burnt down in Phoenix. But right before I left Phoenix, I realized that, I changed a lot, healed a lot of my tension, my emotions, my dyslexia, my Asperger's, my dyspraxia, which is sort of dyslexia of the body. I still didn't have the relationships I wanted with women and realized I was a consistent variable. So I thought, well, maybe if I did a men's group, I would get something. I don't want to do a men's group. That's weird. I go, well, because I think it's weird, maybe I should do it. So I got a lead and ended up starting my own group out of my clinic. I think it was 1995. It was a mediocre group, but it showed me that there was something there. And did several more groups in California and then in North Idaho where I moved. And 20 years ago, I said, look, I'm going to redesign the models for men's groups and really, I guess, men's work. But back then it was just groups. And I integrated all the somatic things I've been using in my practice for all those years. And I didn't know if guys would be into it. Well, to my amazement, they just sucked it up. That group is still going strong. I've moved away from North Idaho, and I'm now in North California. But I'm in a Zoom group, which is like a Zoom group for these expats. But the group itself has had, say, about 500 guys either go through the group, which is now a free community of groups, or in a group. We got 60 guys in current groups. And out of all that, I co-founded a company called Everyman, and then that just wasn't going where we needed to go. At the end of this past year, I took my key guys out of Everyman and formed Meld, a new company, which is really even more focused on using the science of somatic healing or body and the physiology, or we call the emotional physiology of the body, and attachment theory, which basically says we need connection, and if we don't have it in itself can be a trauma. Mm-hmm. So we took all that science and all my experience over the decades and really have honed it into supporting men in these different groups and programs.
Oh, it's awesome. Absolutely amazing. And I would like to ask, what is MELD an acronym?
Yeah, it stands for Men's Emotional Leadership Development.
Yeah, that's really neat. And you say it emphasizes a bottom-up approach to men's emotional development. Can you kind of explain what that means and how that's going to be different than traditional therapeutic methods, which, I started out with the shoulders up approach, sitting on a couch, 100 hours on a couch talking therapy, EMDR. I don't think I experienced exactly how it was supposed to go on TMS. And so I'm a huge proponent of this whole idea that it's not just shoulders up. And until we get the rest of it involved, we're not going to see the significant changes we need. So could you kind of explain how you're different from that and how you're able to see significant changes because of that?
Yeah, I think so much of therapy traditionally in the last, 20 years or more has been sort of the top-down approach, or you're calling the shoulders up approach, where it's more cognitive, mental, or analytical. So there's a place for that. And it often helps, well, sometimes helps. But one of the things I see with all of my guys is that they've gotten some results doing that approach, and then they sort of stop. And then they start beating themselves up because they want to change, but they're not changing, or it doesn't last, or they have to keep starting over again. And no one's explained to them, let alone helped them in a bottom-up approach, which is to say, dealing with the physiology, because science has proven. When I got into this 50 years ago, this stuff was weird. It was like way out on the fringes. And now these therapies, as we were talking before we started about Peter Levine and somatic experiencing and Stephen Porges, and all this is state of the art. It's the hottest therapy out there because the therapists are realizing it works, it lasts, it's fun to do. And, now with all the science behind it, it makes sense and it's been proven. And so what the science basically says is before we have a feeling, we have a physiological response. And in that physiological response, within a millisecond or two, causes an emotional experience. And then we have a mental or intellectual or cognitive experience. But we've been trained in this culture because it's so dualistic and so mentally oriented that our mind controls everything. And I've always said, if that was the case, fixing our emotional problems would be like solving a math problem. Mm-hmm. But I think we all realize solving our emotional problems is no math problem. And so the variable that we're not traditionally been looking at is the other part of it, the physiological part. And what you know so well, Aaron, is that stress and trauma, and it's essentially the same thing in terms of physiology, really drives the bus. And when we understand that, and when we're able to work with that physiology, and we can make huge changes that are not only sustainable, but generative. And by generative, I mean, once our body reunites with our instinctual abilities or desires, we start to learn or relearn these skills on a somatic or unconscious level. And in a stressful situation, or maybe even a trauma situation, without much thought, we are behaving in a different way. So we're more present, we're more engaged, and we leave a stressful situation not stressed.
I feel like that top-down approach, which is, I'm not going to say it's dead, and I definitely think it has its, like you say, its place. I definitely grew in those moments. I did plateau, and then it was, while I didn't beat myself up at the beginning, it was more of, well, this is just as good as it's going to get. I have a dead kid, and it doesn't get good when you have a dead kid. That just doesn't. And, I say it over and over and over. As long as we tell ourselves that lie, we're going to live it, and we'll bring it to fruition. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the next thing I want to discuss, and, you've already talked about working with men and all that. And in our society, we have this stigma, and that's a big driver of my podcast. I want men talking about mental health to be normalized because of how it strengthens us, not weakens us. There's all kinds of negative terms that come with a guy who's being in touch with his feelings or things like that. So I know you've run into that tons starting this thing in the 70s. In 24, we're dealing with it. So I can only imagine what you've dealt with over the years, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of growth already. Not only what are the misconceptions do men typically have about vulnerability and how are you addressing them in their program, but also give us a little projection. How do you think things are going? Are we peaking out right now? Or are we just on our way up? How do you see us
I
as a
think we're on our way
society?
up. And it wasn't any brilliance, it was just persistence and maybe some luck that I realized decades ago in my clinic that, and I was one of these guys too. If you asked me directly, what do you feel, Owen? Like emotionally, what do you feel? I'd be looking for the closest door out of the room. But then I realized I could pretty much say the same question, but contextualize it around stress. Guys would answer it. And so, in fact, guys like to brag about how much stress they're under, and they want to run talking about how much emotions they experience or don't want to share. So I quickly realized, and some with women, but particularly with men, that if we could contextualize it around stress, the physiology of stress, we get guys talking about it. And so that's really the essence of what we do with MELD. And, we talk about the science, we've honed it down to some simple processes and all that. But essentially, what we're doing with guys is, look, yes, we have emotions and being vulnerable is important, but we'll get to that. We're going to talk about physiology and why you, me, and the rest of us are so screwed up. And essentially, that's a function of two things, or maybe three. First, our stress and trauma, which is, what we're talking about. The culture we've grown up in, which until we really have some perspective, we don't realize how much of a box it really is. And that becomes stressful and traumatic, or at least self-containing. And then with those two, there's this whole thing of what the therapists and research calls attachment theory, which is the whole science that we need connection. And when we don't have vulnerable or authentic connection, we are stressed. And then again, because of the culture, we're so attuned to not having it, sort of like you said with what you have with therapy, we just grow to accept that this is the normal. And so I think science and these more innovative approaches are starting to disintegrate this box, and people are going, yeah, I want more of this. How do I learn this? And so it's really blowing up therapy. It's really turning itself upside down. And like I said, the hottest therapies now are the somatic therapies, and the second ones are the ones based on attachment theory. And my partner's a EFT therapist, which is an emotional focus therapy or therapist. It was started by Sue Johnston, a brilliant woman. She was sort of like Dr. Rolfe. She was a Brit scientist, and she just took attachment theory and proved how, as humans, we need connection. And she primarily worked with couples. And she endorsed what we do, as if what I created was therapy, it would be a T therapy, because we're so aligned, not only with the somatics, but also with the attachment or connection thing, because we need that. And so when we can get guys that want to understand it, but have experiences of it, and I'm sure you see this too, is when you put men in an emotionally safe place, which is not hard to do, and you support them and maybe give them just a bit of a training, if sometimes none, they will start to open up. And then when one guy says something that's a little vulnerable, and he sees that he's not being shamed, but actually being honored by every guy, guys almost get competitive. They start to go, I could be more vulnerable. I could be more vulnerable. And within, a half an hour, guys are crying and they're being vulnerable, and they're not thinking anything about it. And they're saying, I've shared something I haven't shared in years, or I've shared this and I have never told anyone. And it's so easy. And guys are getting honored for it, because that's what our innate being wants. But in that society out there, we have the antithesis of that. So I think what you and I and the rest of us are doing is creating these safe places for guys to really, and this is what we say to them, to go back to a much more natural setting.
I was one who anger was my emotion. And so I was angry or not angry. So not angry, I guess, is when I thought I was happy. And I've since learned how much, the big things I preach are, it's not just angry and not angry. It's sad, hurt feelings, scared, all these things. And then that comes out as anger. And then happy, when we begin to identify our emotions, then we can see what really makes us happy. I spent so much of my life doing what I thought made me happy, and I don't even want to do that anymore. And now that I've learned what I really want and what I really strive to do. And so it's so huge. And I love the approach, let's talk about something you like, let's feel comfortable and see that it's, because men want to open up about this. I experience.
Oh yeah. And just like you're saying, I thought too, I was doing what I thought was happy, but you realize that what we thought was happy is what someone else thought happy was.
Yeah.
It wasn't our happy.
That's exactly.
But you're right. We can't even start to begin what our happy feeling and knowing what our happy is until we clear some space out.
Yeah, and if you don't know what your happy is, then what the hell are you setting your goals on? What is that for? What is that about? And so many people they think that money's going to solve the problems, and I get that it will solve maybe some stress or headaches you have now, but that's really just another symptom. Your lack of money is another symptom of, just like alcoholism or narcotics or whatever, of the trauma you've experienced and not dealt with. And so I try to say it comes along with the rest of the growth. In today's society, men are caught in kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. We've got the social climate where a guy wants to be a good guy, a nice human being, good to be around, etc. But then they get pushed so far that they don't really stand on any type of solid ground. I think it's when I was younger, it'd call spineless. He's spineless. He can't stand on anything because I don't want to hurt your feelings for anything. Well, I don't care what color or sexual orientation or any of that. I've got, my children are very diverse children, and I've dealt with a lot of these topics in home, but you don't want to be spineless. And then you've got the other side of that spectrum. It's what I call the macho man. It's a man who's kind of bullying his way through life, taking what he thinks he wants. Again, any of us who are not dealing with this emotional connection really don't know what in the hell we want. We just know what our mom and dad or mentors or teachers or whatever told us we wanted. And so these macho men are putting negative energy out all the time, bullying their way through life. So that negative energy, I fully accept. I don't know if there's really science behind it, but negative energy out, negative energy in, and positive energy out, positive energy in. So these men are putting all this negative energy out in the world. It's going to come back. And I know it's going to come back, and they're going to be suffering as a result. So giving the increasing discussions around masculinity, and I know we hear toxic masculinity, then we hear the weak one. And so how does MELD redefine or support men's roles in today's society?
Well, there's a lot there. So let me
sure
unpack some of the parts. You might be familiar with this guy, Richard Reeves. He wrote a book that came out about a year ago called Of Boys and Men. He's a booking scholar, an English dude, sort of a geek with research and all that. Brilliant book, and we had him on our program. And so the takeaway was sort of what you just said. He admits that sort of a top-down approach and more institutional and is solving the problem, which I think we need to deal with it in that level. And he sees that what I'm doing is much more the bottom-up or scalable approach. But I think his observation is really good. So we have the hyper masculine or the macho guys, and politically they're sort of classically the Republicans, and as he says, the conservatives want to take us back to the 50s when the guys were in charge, because if the guys are in charge, we're going to solve everything. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we all know that's not going to work. It didn't really work then. And then the liberals want us to, as he says, anything that's done for boys or men is against women, and that's not true. And more women are seeing, just for their own situation, let alone for the men and boys that they care about, we got to take care of the boys and the men. And so I think people are starting to realize this. Just in the last few years, I see the media, research, the government, social media even starting to make some distinctions that they weren't making before, which is good. And then to back away even more, in this culture, we've been trained as men. Not all of us, but a lot of us, particularly the quote more educated man, or the one that became maybe more for the middle class or upper class or whatever, to be sensitive, as you said, to be nice. And then Robert Glover wrote that book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is it's an excellent book. I've recommended it to many guys, which basically says, look, we're trained to be nice, but in the long run, it's a facade. It's, as you would say, a coping mechanism or an addiction. And he unpacks why we're trained that way and who benefits, and really in the long run, who doesn't benefit. And it's not just us men. And I was one of these nice guys or sensitive men. And I remember, I was young. In my early 20s, reading a book, and it was written by a woman called How to Be a Sensitive Man. And I've since tried to find it and I couldn't. It was a small little book. It was like my textbook on how to be a man. And it worked in one way. So women loved it because, at first I was nice. I was a nice guy. And they'd go out with these not nice guys, bad boys. And, oh, and you're so nice and this and that. But the relationship would only go so far. and it would die, usually a slow death. They would get bored. I would get bored, and started to sense there was something missing. It took me a little while to realize what it was. And it was sort of what you're talking about, the essence of masculinity, which in this culture, we don't really know what it is. And to back all this up even further, what I started to realize is, we all grew up in tribes 10,000 years ago. And then we went to the farm, and 200 or 250 years ago, we left the farm for the factory. And that's when things really changed. And so when the guys left to go to work 60 hours a week or whatever it was, we went around to support the boys. And so women had to step up. So the teachers, the parents were women. And so over these few hundred years, what it is to be emotional, not just for society, but for boys and men, has skewed towards the feminine. And most therapists are women. And so what's happened is we as a culture have accepted their model as our model. And it's not a conspiracy. It was sort of inevitable. And I think women are really good at sensing when we're off, maybe even where we're off and when we're on. They're not nearly as good as getting us on, getting us on or in our own emotional authenticity. And it takes men to do that. And what I found pretty quickly when I started doing these groups, you put these guys in a group, and we, in the course of these real, authentic groups or real interactions, we teach each other. We teach each other how to feel, how to express, and how to be a man with their emotions, where we could be sensitive and vulnerable, but also have a backbone. And what I realized was that there's this term called, what I created, called assertive vulnerability, which is really the combination of both being vulnerable, open and sensitive and all the things we're talking about, but also assertive, which is not angry. And so being assertive as you're vulnerable, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but as guys, not just get the concept, but they often see a guy do it in a group. And I was like, because I was starting these groups, I was sort of the first, and I had to do it to just keep the group going forward, of, being vulnerable and saying, no, that's just not acceptable. You agreed to this, and now you're doing that. And guys would go, wow, I've never seen a guy do anything like that, where they weren't reactionary. They weren't, apologizing or overreacting. They were just like on. Mm-hmm. And so guys started doing that. And then they started seeing that the relationships outside the group improved. And the joke in our group was the best night for sex was the night of the group, because these guys would come home open, but like, in their masculine. And I lived, this was in a small town. So these women would come up to me and thank me for, oh, you're doing, the group's doing so much for Joe. He's never been so this or that. And he comes home and I just wanted to rip his clothes off, because this is the guy I always wanted. Yeah. So to just bring it all together, I think, yes, it's trauma, but a lot of it's the society we've grown up in. And we can heal the trauma, which is the stress and all that, the chronic stress. We need to do that. But we also need to change the model that we're operating in.
Yeah, I like that. Assertive vulnerability. Because the country we grew up in, the state we grew up in, the city we grew up in, if it was a big city, the small area of that city that we grew up in, our parents and all that really mold us into who we are. And we don't even realize it until we start working on this stuff. But I was naturally, I think, trained in that, because I was raised by a single mom and I didn't have a dad around. But my mom's vulnerabilities in her career and just being a female made me want to step up to kind of, be a security or a force, if you will, something like that. And so I did. I walked at it, and I want people listening to understand, as we describe this, it's as hard of a balancing act as it is to describe it. We don't want to offend people. We want to be good human beings, but we also need to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're looking out for ourselves. We're getting our needs getting taken care of. If we just lay down and take everything, then that doesn't happen. And we've seen that too, to your point of the failure of the macho man in charge. And there's also is a time when you got to stand up and be the damn man in the room and say, no, we're not doing it. It's not how this works. This is how it works. And I understand I'm doing things the best I know to do in this moment. And that's this, and then be assertive. So I kind of naturally grew up in that, but I do have a hard time kind of put it in a nice package like that. So I like assertive vulnerability because that's exactly what it is. I can be vulnerable, but at the same time, let everybody know that I'm still in charge of the situation. And I think that's to our point of men dealing with this too, and thinking that it's a weakness to be aware of their vulnerabilities. So fear or sadness or having their feelings hurt, but it makes us so much stronger because we're able to say, hey, don't talk to me like that. Like that hurts my feelings when you say words like that. Don't say things like that to me. I don't say them to you, and it's not fair for you to do it to me. I think, this next question is going to get to this, but it works. I don't know why it works, and you're kind of explaining it to us, but it really does work. So standing up for ourselves is so huge. So anyway, on to the next one. So many men are struggling to find good relationships. I'm a big believer in one finding themselves and knowing themselves inside and out before they're really going to be able to find a great partner. Going through this recovery journey is so altering in so many different ways that it can lead a person to be a different person than who they were when they started. And when I say that, obviously my name's still Aaron. I'm still a male, white, 46 years old, but I'm not the same guy I was 5 years ago, especially 12 years ago. I mean, all that changes. And so it's so big. What didn't get on our nerves before may get on our nerves now. And to my point of, you're not going to talk to me like that, like some things we might have dealt with in the past, life's too short. I'm not dealing with that. You're not going to go around hurting my feelings. So how does Mel's approach facilitate better relationships, not just among men, but between men and women?
I think in several ways, and part of it was what you just said, that one of the things I've said for years is, if you want deeper connections with someone else, and I think we all do, and I would argue we physically need that, we got to have a deeper connection with ourselves. And my hypothesis is that we can't connect any deeper to someone else than we can connect to ourselves. Now, I would agree with, the EFT therapist that the other side of that, in a good relationship or good therapy that's using this model, people can learn how to connect to themselves. You can come back at it the other way. But, as I have, and I've seen with, hundreds and hundreds of guys, is they've developed this ability to connect to themselves, often first somatically, then emotionally. Inevitably, they're starting to connect to others, usually their significant other first, and then their family, and then their work and professional associations in a more authentic way, where yes, sometimes as we do that, we start bumping up to things that, this never really worked for me. Now I'm really feeling it, and now I'm going to say something about it. And either it or the relationship changes or it ends, it moves on, and something better shows up to sort of replace that. But we can't really do that unless we have some sense of what our somatic and emotional and maybe even relational experience is. And one of the things I've said for years is also like, ask for what you want. The power's in the asking, not necessarily in the getting. So, as you were sort of inferring, you might say, I don't do this to you. This is what I feel. This is what I want. And this is unacceptable. And, you might not get it. You might not get it initially because your partner, she or he is dealing with their stress or trauma too. But once we sort of back away and we see that in ourselves, and we have more compassion for ourselves, we also have more compassion for someone else. And that helps a relationship. But that is not an excuse to, stay in a relationship for years when you're doing the work and the other person, for whatever reason, can't, and the relationship is toxic. That said, I think sometimes people are suggesting that people leave relationships too quickly. And I've just seen with the work I've done with relationships is that with a good relationship therapist, coach, or program, a lot of relationships that were destined to end transform. Because my belief is that, again, intrinsically we want connections. We just don't know how to do it. We've had stress and trauma, and we had a really bad training in models. Because I'm sure I've met someone, but I can't think anyone in this culture that I've ever met that could say that they had really good modeling from their parents. I'm like, I want what they had. Well, I know what I want and know how to get it because of what my parents had. So we didn't have good models. Society, our institutions really didn't give us the support we need. So, it's like we're going into maybe the most critical thing in our life with no training. We go into professions where we're a hell of a lot more training than we go into, relationships.
For sure. Success is born when both parties engage. And I think that a lot of times the guy is the one who's tough to get engaged. So if you can get him engaged, she gonna perk up and want to engage because she wants it to work too. And there's I don't believe there's one person for all of us by any means, but I believe that that initial attraction, when we'll overlook everything because of the attraction
Mm-hmm.
piece and all that, there's something there, and we go through some growth there. And if both parties are willing to continue growing, the sky is the limit, because what happens is we grow apart. We have the children, and we're running the rat race. We're hamsters in wheels, and we're just not dealing with anything. All of a sudden, everybody leaves the house, and the man and the woman are standing looking at each other, going, "Who the hell are you? I don't even know you." And I want to stay married to you, but I don't know you. And I know women are doing it more now. They're saying, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who you are," and they come with, "I want this, 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 and this to change." And as we've talked about, you can't just approach a man like that. What the hell are you talking about? I've been this man for the last 20 years. We've been married, and all of a sudden you want me to change all these things? That ain't my problem. That's your problem. And then we then everything breaks apart, and shit's flying everywhere, and we realize, hey, if I would have just taken my guard down a little bit, and not, it's I have to say, it's hard to have an accountability partner that's your relationship partner, because you ask them to do something for you, and then when they do it, you get all pissed off at them for doing it. And I think we can tell guys a certain thing, that if their significant other said the exact same words in the exact same tone,
Mm-hmm.
they would tell them that they wanted to split up. And it's just a matter of who you are. I'm sure you've got some science that goes behind that. It's who you are in the man's life to who he wants to hear that from. Like, going to listen to his boss all day long, carry on about what he messed up and what he did wrong and this, that, and the other. But if he gets home and his wife says something about he missed a spot when he was weed eating, he's going to lose his mind. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm going to move on to this, the rolfing, and it'll get the somatic practices in there too. I don't have any experience with rolfing, but listen to you talk, I think I'm going to seek some out. But with your background in that and somatic practices, how are you integrating physical wellness with emotional healing, in specifically in the programs?
Yeah, so we give the guys a little training around the science and basically give them a new model, because as you were sort of inferring, I think this is true with anyone, but particularly guys, when you give them a new model that makes sense and you can explain it in a way that seems logical, because guys are logical, so it doesn't take much for a guy to get it. They go, "Oh, okay." And because it resonates with them, because when they think about it, they go, no one's ever told me that, but you're right. Under stress, I do this and this and this and this. Yeah, you're right. No one ever laid that out. So you got them engaged. And so if you explain the components that they never really thought about or saw how they were connected, they go, "Oh, okay." So that's the context. And then we just teach them some simple skills. So one of the things I created several years ago is what I call the ROC formula, ROC. So everyone tells us, usually women, slow, to relax. You need to relax. You chill out. Yeah. And we go, okay, but we don't know how to do that. And everything for us becomes performative. The culture, and it's sort of our genes in terms like the hunters of the hunter gatherers. It's based on performance, which is kind of more that way. So when our partners are telling us that we need to do this thing, and no one's told us how to do that, so we're sort of caught in a corner of, we need to perform this thing. We're not even clear what it is. We're certainly not clear on how to do it. So we go into this freeze response, which is when we can't fight, we can't run, our physiology freezes. So, which is, core of what we work with. So the guy checks out, and that's how it's experienced, particularly for a partner. So she gets more scared because, I'm in a relationship with you, Aaron, you start to check out. So you're physically there, but I can tell you're not present. I get scared. So then in most cases, what does a woman do? And the EFT model, I start to pursue you, which means I get angry at you. I want that connection. And you're going, no. Mm-hmm. And you might not be running from the room, but you're checking out. So that has that same sense of you're not present. So I'm getting more scared and you're getting more scared. And we're in this classic pursuer avoider complex. So what has to happen is guys need to sort of understand the physiology of it and then have some skills. And so one of the first skills is knowing how to relax, is really knowing how to slow down our physiology. And because what I realized, and this came from Peter Levine and others, and really my experience is that when we're relaxed, our physiology is slowed down because a stress state is a survival state. And so in survival, we orient towards threat. Where is the threat? Where could the threats be? So it's an external orientation. We're hyper vigilant. We're hyper alert. Everything's turned up. The blood's going to our limbs, to our legs to fight, to run, to our arms to fight, shuts it off from our gut, and different parts of our brain get turned off and the other parts get turned on. So we're in survival. Now, we might not think it's survival, but our body does. And so it's reoriented all its resources towards survival. And connection is not a priority during survival. It's that simple. So guys go, yeah, you're right. So here's the deal. If your body slows down, it tells your emotions and it tells your brain, your cognitive facilities, that I must be safe. And really, there's no tigers in this room. And my partner's a little upset, but I can be more present. And maybe I feel some of the stress response, but I don't have to check out or go into my reaction. I can, hang out in a little discomfort. And because we're hardwired to manifest those signs. So if I start to slow down and I start to be relaxed, I might not be relaxed, but maybe my breathing slowing down, I'm aware of my body. You're going to pick up those cues, my nonverbals of my face, my body, my breath, my voice, and you're going to go, oh, Owen's not the threat. And unconsciously you're thinking, he's not in his survival response. Oh, maybe this space is a little safer. You downregulate it and you slow down, you relax. I pick up that, and we can literally transform a survival situation into a connection situation by one person having the model, but the skills and the courage to lean into the stress, feel it in their body, and hang out there and not go into a reaction.
I love that. My girlfriend's best friend, one thing that she has said, when she finds herself in a conflict with her significant other, she's fighting to stay together and he's fighting to break up. And I recognize that. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, in that I shoot into fight or flight, and I know I can't physically fight the situation. So I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to get the hell out of here. You're not doing this anymore. And I think I am fighting to get out and to not stay together. And knowing that now, I can, now I de-escalate as fast as I can. But knowing that now, when I de-escalate, it's like, hey, argue to stay together. Argue to get to because it's just, all that's happening here is we've upset someone that we love. They're trying to let us know. They may be doing a really, really bad job telling us. But like you said, we can't control that. We can control the man in the mirror, and he can de-escalate things and say, hang on, honey, what's going on? What have I really done? Where does the bottom of this? What's going on? Can I fix? So I love that. And that leads to another problem, and that is the lack of support by a significant other. And something that I've run into a lot is men will say, well, I open up to my significant other. And she's all about that, of course. She wants to hear all about it. She wants me to open up. She wants me to be vulnerable. This is great for her. But she takes notes. And when we get in a fight, she takes that vulnerability and throws it in my face like cold water. And obviously that's a huge problem. So what advice do you give to women who want to support men in their lives in pursuing emotional growth? And how can one appropriately address that with their significant other? So I target men on this podcast. So I don't know. I know that some women do listen, but the majority of them wouldn't. So you're going to give me an answer to what women, how they could help us when we're going through this. But for those men listening, how can they express that to the woman in there?
One of the things that I learned, and I just sort of learned it by accident, which is when I came up with this whole assertive vulnerability realization, was several years ago when I was living up in Sandpoint, Idaho, up near the Canadian border in North Idaho. I was dating a woman in Calgary, and we were having a discussion, and she started to escalate her complaints. And so the first 30 seconds was, all right. And then it got a little more. I go, and then I saw where it was going. I go, all right. I'm saying to myself, I got to say something. No, you don't, Owen. Oh, you do. And if you say something, you're going to end this relationship. So that's going through my head. Owen, you're the kind of guy that you just can't keep your mouth shut. So you're going to say something. So I practice a little of what I teach. I slow down, I relaxed. And then I go, I'm going to speak what I feel, what I want, but also what I want for the relationship, which was like a new thing for me in that moment. And so I just spoke for maybe 15 seconds, a few sentences. I basically said, what you're saying, Sally, is not true for me. And this is my experience and want for the relationship. So I spoke for the relationship, not just my own need, but perspective or my ownership of my part of the relationship. And then I shut up. I didn't rant. I didn't go on. I didn't justify or explain. I just laid it out matter-of-factly, but, with some vulnerability. And I shut up. And it was probably 30 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. She didn't say anything. And guess what she said when she got back on the phone?
What's that?
Honey, you melted me. And then it went, and then I realized what it was that, I was being assertive and vulnerable at the same time, but was also speaking for the relationship, which, as you said, I think it's defaulted in this culture where the woman ends up being the voice for the relationship and the guy isn't. That's how I was trained. Mm-hmm. And that's how I see most guys. And that's how I see the culture training us. And so when the light went off in my head, I thought, hell, I could do that. And that is what transformed that conversation. And I think part of the burden that women carry is, and no one really talks about it, and they don't really know this consciously, is they're not only being responsible for themselves, maybe even us in some ways, but for the relationship. So when a guy, to the best of his abilities, can even just acknowledge that, let alone speak for it, she downregulates, because in so many relationships, they default to where the woman is the emotional responsible party. And I think that's always going to skew a little more that way. So there's research that supports that, mm-hmm. but it shouldn't be 100%. Mm-hmm. I think having conversations with guys about this separately and maybe with women, and having conversations with women about some of these dynamics that are at play. And that's just one of them that are parts of the water that we swim in. We don't realize that. So when we unpack a lot of this, people downregulate. And then, explaining the physiology part and, of course, the cultural part, all that just takes it away from the things that we put it on and project it onto. And when we understand that he or she's not the problem, as you're sort of saying, and that really the culture is the problem, it gives us a lot more room to operate in. And to answer your question about what should women say is, I think part of it is just express how much you want it to work out, sort of in what I would call a meta conversation, and not making the guy wrong, not making it about him, but making it maybe about his trauma, his family, or the culture. Aaron, you had to do this, this, and this, and this is how you survived. This is how you coped. You've done a great job of that. But a lot of these skills, it's not really helping you in this relationship, and it's not your fault. And and I can feel the consequences of it. I might bitch about it or whatever, but I can't be the person to get you over that hump. And that's where we get a lot of guys. More and more guys are being referred to us by women because I think they're seeing that and they want to help their man, their partner, their son, maybe they're even their father or brother. And they see that as much as they want to help them, they can't do it. Mm-hmm. And we're getting a lot more referrals from therapists, which are, again, usually women, because, these therapists are seeing that, I've helped this guy, but, and I would say this too, that for most guys, it's not a psychological problem, it's a learning problem. Mm-hmm. Learning in terms of learning the right physiology, or going back to the right physiology that we have, and then unlearning and learning some of these behavioral skills that we never had.
Yeah, I think it's all about learning too. And that just based on myself, we are logical creatures. And if you could just break this down into logic for me, then I'll roll with it. And that's what I did. And I understood. I used to call that statement I made about positive energy out, positive energy in, or negative out in. That was something I would have called hokey pokey, stupid, not too long ago, 5, 10 years ago. But now I totally know that it's true. I experience it on an absolute regular basis. And so we we have this stigma holding us down. Don't do that because you're going to be a wuss, and everyone's going to make fun of you and all this. And so we don't even open the door to see what's behind it, to learn. And it's not, I say it often, it's not rocket science. Implementation is often difficult, but these are, the things that you and I have talked about this whole time, which has been an amazing conversation, are all common sense things. We just don't know where to put them in and how to put them in. And we don't want to be sissies, and we want to have spines and all. So we don't know what's going on. Just a little guidance really helps. So like I said, amazing conversation. And I'm going to be sharing a link to your website, meld.community. That's MELD.community. This link directs listeners to explore the diverse programs offered by MELD, specifically designed to cater to the different needs and schedules of men seeking personal and professional growth. You offer several options from a 6-month down to a weekend retreat. Can you tell us a little bit more about those options and anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, Aaron, we just from years of doing this and really starting out with all these men's groups and training other guys to start successful groups. And guys want to be in groups more than ever, which is great. But often the groups don't survive because they just don't have the skills, and the skills aren't all that hard. So for that reason, and like a short course on how to get on track to do some of the things that we're talking about, I created a course about 10 years ago, and then I brought it to Everyman and upped the quality of it even more. They did a huge study on this course, which just published a few months ago in the APA journal, which is the psychological journal out there. It was a 13-page, research paper studied on all the things that happens in this course and how amazing it is for guys. And now we've sort of tweaked it again with MELD. And so the core is like a 10-week course where we just dive in to the physiology, the model, how to apply it, which is the important thing. And then this powerful part of all our work in some way is the peer-to-peer support. Mm-hmm. And, when guys can learn from others and support others and practice with others, the learning curve just really goes up. It's a lot more fun. And as you were just saying, we sort of want to be vulnerable, but we don't have a safe place to do it. So when we have a safe place to do it, almost every guy opens up way more than they would think they would. And I remember a while ago, we did one of our trainings and we had this big guy with all these tats, ex-special forces guy. And we do it like we call it check-in round, where everyone goes around and just says who they are and what they're feeling and anything else they need to say. So we're near the end and he comes around and he says, "Yeah, I don't like men. Don't touch me," and something else. And at the end, he's going, "Guys, I love you. Here's my number. Call me if you ever need anything." He's going around hugging everyone. I mean, and it's the old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Yeah. And so, and he had a huge heart, and we just sort of knew it, but he was trained to protect that. And once he had a safe enough experience and he saw other guys being honored for their vulnerability, he just opened up on his own in his own way. So this is essentially what we do in this 10-week course. We give guys an opportunity to do that. And once they have that, because it is naturalistic, you don't lose it. Mm-hmm. So that's the core of the 10-week program. And then I do a very sort of deep dive 12-week group coaching, small group program called Forge, which is using all my skills of 50 years. And I take a small group of guys through an accelerated journey of transformation, really. And then we have our training, which is what I've been doing for years, called the Grow Training, which what we do is I created this method that really came from, now it's close to 50 years of just working with thousands of people and seeing what happens when people transform. What's the arc or change that's consistent when we really change? So I distilled that out and going, okay, if that's the consistent arc, how can I accelerate it, facilitate it? So what we do in this training is we just go step by step. So we do a little teaching, do a little demo, and then we put you with two guys, and you do that work on each of the other two guys. So you rotate around, and over a course of a weekend, you learn this, not just in your head, but in your body. And you get really close to these guys. And yeah, it's transformational for these guys, but you also leave with these skills.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't just have a transformational experience, you also leave with these skills. And, they use them in their life, in their relationships, in their groups, and also at work, because these are the skills that we all should have had trained in us or given to us, and we never did. And those are our main programs. And then, we have a free membership where guys can just join and participate at whatever level they want.
Oh, great. And we can find all that at your website.
Yeah, all that's at the website.
Outstanding. Well, I can't tell you how much I've appreciated this conversation. Everybody listening, I appreciate your time. Our time is our most valuable asset, and sharing it with us, we're really appreciative of that. And I know we've added value to your time today. So thanks again for listening. And thanks again, Owen, for being on.
You're welcome, Aaron. My honor.